This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We try and bring you every day brilliant people in business, private equity, and more. Today, we're going to talk about one of the subjects of the day, which is this DeepSeek and what it means, and to give us some insight on it. And we're joined today by the brightest person I know in the software computer engineering world, and that's Robert Becker, who I have to disclose is also, in addition to being a graduate student in computer sciences, my son. So when I say that he's the brightest person I know, he is, but it's also, I want to make sure people know that I've got a bias here. In any event, Bobby, take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's talk about DeepSeek and what it means. I mean, we saw yesterday NVIDIA dropped by $600 billion, which I'm not a math guy, but $600 billion seems like a lot of money. The NASDAQ lost $1 trillion, some rebound today. But what is DeepSeek? What is it? What does it mean? And take a moment and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I think bias is going to be one of the biggest questions here. But I'm Bobby, I'm your son, and I'm currently studying computer science at Tulane. And a lot of my research actually involves studying the historical networks that are embedded into large language models. So like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Claude, there's a bunch of others of these chatbots people talk to, and they each have a different model of history. And that is one of my areas of research. So there are a lot of PhD level experts on AI, machine learning, large language models, but I do think I have a pretty good grasp on how they work and where everything's heading. So I'm glad I got this opportunity to stand on my soapbox and sort of talk about where I think the AI economy is going and how DeepSeek is going to affect it.
Thank you. For people that aren't familiar, Bobby's a graduate student. He was an undergraduate in computer science philosophy, graduate degree now in computer science. Talk to us for a second. So what does DeepSeek mean? Why did it blow up NVIDIA? Tell us a little about what DeepSeek is. We've all read a little bit about it the last couple of days. We've seen more about this, some of these terms we had never heard of if you're not in the computer science world, like Javon's paradox or Javon's rule, whatever it is. But tell us what some of this means.
So DeepSeek had two main, well, there's a lot of different things that they did, but to simplify it, they had two main architecture improvements over the standard process of training and designing large language models in America. The first one was their pre-training process, and this is the bulk of the process of making a language model. If you use ChatGPT, how it knows what different words are is because it was trained on a bunch of data. And this was considered in America kind of just a bottleneck of costs that people didn't really go after trying to make it more efficient. So, and that work actually came out a month ago, and they found that they could train their models on around 1/20th the compute than we thought we could train models at the same strength. So that was a huge architecture improvement. And that's why there is a lot of worry about particularly NVIDIA on if their stock was overvalued because these big tough.
So talk about that. So talk about that for a second, because I think that's really informative. And I not heard it said like that. 1/20th of the cost or computer power to get to the same place in terms of advanced sort of learning or AI learning. And what that means, there's been all this investment, because this is now I'm starting to understand, there's been all this investment in super fast chips and all this structural engineering power and grids that need to be built for all that power, computing power. But if you could do the same thing with, D batteries versus super special batteries, it makes the cost structure a lot less. And so a lot of this investment in grids and everything else in all this infrastructure in the NVIDIA super chips may not be as necessary as people thought. Is that sort of the business situation that's going on, or the discussion?
Yes, I think you're outlining quite well. Now, I think it is important to note that in the long-term view, there is always efficiency being made on the hardware of computers, and there's always going to be need for more compute. So NVIDIA, they make amazing chips. So they're always going to be in business. Long-term, they're fine. But will there be a short-term correction in the market? Because in the short term, especially with, if you saw the Stargate announcement, Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, and the SoftBank guys saying they're going to invest $500 billion to build all these data factories, just all this very short term people throwing money into it, that might not be as high. So there could be a correction there.
Fascinating, fascinating. And what does DeepSeek mean for the average company, like an average mid-market company or larger company? Is this going to make it easier for some of these companies to utilize some of these tools because it's not quite as expensive to do so? Are there potential benefits to us to go with some of the negatives to the NVIDIAs and some of the players that have really, made so much money and grown so much market cap from this?
Well, so DeepSeek, obviously, they're a company operating in China, and there's some censorship issues with their model. But as within the bounds they're operating under, they seem to be as good faith and as committed to doing good research of a company as you can be. So one of the great things about DeepSeek is they did completely publish all of their research. So people at Meta yesterday, people at OpenAI, people at Anthropic, they're all completely dissecting every single thing that DeepSeek did to improve their models, and they're going to incorporate that into their next wave. So ultimately, these means these models will be cheaper to deploy. If you wanted to have a software product that includes an LLM, that's going to be a lot cheaper to get a much more intelligent model. And then that also means that now the barrier to entry, if you're a startup who wants to have their own they call these, the main models, the foundational frontier models. The cost of barrier to entry has moved to $100 million of compute, obviously more for research and operating costs and this and that, but $100 million to $5 million. So we could see a lot more smaller players coming out with strong foundational models that don't have to rely on using OpenAI's API and stuff like that.
No, and that's absolutely fascinating. We've seen so much of that in the healthcare sector, where originally certain robotics could only be bought by hospitals and health systems, but then the cost went down, so surgery centers and other lower cost providers could utilize some of that technology too. And it seems like, and you've seen a lot of this in the fintech world, where so much technology has gotten better and better, it's more available to mid-market players and smaller players. And it sounds like the impact of this might be that more and more of this is available to mid-sized and smaller companies that just otherwise couldn't afford to play into level with this level of artificial intelligence tools and so forth. Is that part of the business hypothesis here or theory here?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a possibility. So I think something that's important to note is companies like particularly OpenAI and Google, their focus over the past couple years was trying to make the most intelligent model that they could possibly come up with and then turn it into a product. And especially with OpenAI, about a couple months ago, they showed a demo for O3 where they had a model think through and solve the most impressive, the most difficult math problems that math PhDs could come up with. And it solved a good percentage of that. But the compute cost of just solving those problems was like $500,000. So that has been the main focus on the big players in the AI economy has been what is the most possible thing we can come up with. And then as a secondary focus for them, they're like, okay, how can you make this more efficient so people can use it? But I think definitely now that there is more work in making it efficient, that decentralizes it a little more. That's a lot of people are talking about the difference between open source, which is what DeepSeek did, versus closed source, which is what OpenAI did in terms of not wanting to share all your research findings. And this is definitely a bigger win to the open source world of people publishing their research, their code, so it can be reproduced by everyone else with way less barrier to entry.
And why does a company decide to do open source? Is it because they want to become the sort of main platform for everything? Because it seems like they're giving up a lot to be open source, but obviously it makes you much more available to everybody and as a tool to build on. Why do people make that choice? Could you give us a moment on that?
So DeepSeek actually, they're not planning to make money off of their product. They're actually part of a hedge fund, and this was funded by the hedge fund to do independent research, but they're not exactly aimed toward profitability. And I think one of there's a lot of ways that, and we can talk about this a bit more if you want to. There's a lot of ways I think Americans should be confident in our engineering ability and our science. But one of the things where I think this makes us question our assumptions is in the American economy, there's been a lot more intermingling between the research and development side and the commercialization side. And obviously, in many cases, that's great. For example, ChatGPT, that technology was around for a while before ChatGPT came out, but it wasn't until they released that they realized they could turn the research into a marketable product that people can use. But there is also, and I've talked to people at Google who said this, there's increasing pressure where every single piece of research that people are doing has to be tied into some sort of product or some sort of path to commercialization. But sometimes the pure research and development allows people to make more foundational improvements in research and overall just lead to greater advancement. And that leads to, that doesn't lead to, Google publishing great papers might not directly lead to the being more profitable, but it does improve their credibility and respect as a company.
So one other question, and we'll have you back on. I'd love to discuss this more in the next week or two, just more about both AI and also just what's going on here with DeepSeek and so forth. So the next question is, would you still invest in NVIDIA at this point, or do you view it as a real question mark now as to where you invest in it when it's at, a $3 trillion market cap versus 3.6 trillion a couple of days ago? Do you invest in NVIDIA still or not right now?
Well, I am of the school of thought of don't be a stock picker. So I think whether NVIDIA will go up or down in the short term is an open question. I think I'm of the school of thought that just have an index fund and just wait long term and be patient with the market. But if you are devoting some amount of money to do stock picking just for the fun and the as like I'd say more of a hobby than an actual financial strategy, I would say that I probably would not buy NVIDIA right at this moment. I think that it's already skyrocketed to the number one stock in the world. And, it went down 10%. And obviously people are freaking out about that. But I think for the longer term view, that's okay. Not every stock has to go in infinity and up and up and up. Sometimes there are going to be corrections. And I think there is a real risk of a short-term correction in NVIDIA. But again, I want to reiterate that long term, there's always going to be the need for better GPUs, better CPUs.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Just a phenomenal guest. Thank you so much for joining us. A great learning experience about NVIDIA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.